Okay, let's unpack this. Today, we're diving deep into affirmative action. It's a topic that sits right at this really turbulent intersection. Fairness, opportunity, and how we even define equity in modern society.
Absolutely. It's incredibly complex.
It really is. And it feels like a discussion that inevitably pits two powerful, deeply held ideals against each other.
That's a great way to put it.
On one hand, you've got this desperate, undeniable need to rectify centuries of historical injustices. You just can't ignore that history.
No, you can't.
But then there's the equally fervent belief that all individuals should be treated purely on merit,
Right.
without any consideration of their racial background.
And that's the core tension.
Exactly. Can a society truly achieve equity and address its past
Right.
without, in some measure, maybe inadvertently creating new forms of discrimination?
That is the question, isn't it?
Yeah. That's the profound, sometimes uncomfortable, and always complex question at the heart of our deep dive today. Our sources for this journey are incredibly illuminating, I have to say. They reveal a landscape just marked by deep divisions and fundamental disagreements.
Especially around that core contention.
Right, the contention that affirmative action, despite its stated goals, might actually constitute a form of racial discrimination in practice.
That's right. And for this deep dive, our mission is really to meticulously navigate the source material you've provided. We want to offer a comprehensive and impartial perspective.
Impartial is key here.
Absolutely. We aim to illuminate the foundational arguments and critical perspectives surrounding affirmative action, especially focusing on how critics view these policies as a form of racial discrimination.
And then connect that to the bigger picture.
Precisely. We'll connect this contentious debate to the broader, often turbulent themes of social division that are just so prevalent in modern society.
Got it.
And our goal here isn't to advocate for any particular side or, prescribe solutions. Not at all.
No easy fixes here.
Definitely not. We just want to provide a clear, detailed understanding of the various facets of this issue, to equip you, the listener, with comprehensive knowledge to form your own informed perspective.
So you really understand the what and the why it matters.
Exactly. Understanding the arguments behind these deeply rooted positions.
Absolutely. So think of us as your expert, guides through this incredibly nuanced and, let's be honest, often emotionally charged landscape.
It can definitely get heated.
For sure.
Yeah.
We'll distill the most important insights, maybe some surprising facts, and the key arguments directly from the sources. We're aiming to give you a shortcut to being truly well-informed without feeling, completely overwhelmed by the sheer volume of information out there. You're going to walk away with a richer understanding of not just what affirmative action is, but also the profound ethical, legal, and societal questions it raises.
And how these discussions ripple through almost every aspect of our collective lives.
Yeah, really everything. So let's begin by grounding ourselves in the foundational purpose of affirmative action, at least as it's described in our sources.
Good place to start.
At its heart, these policies were initiated with a very specific and deliberate intent to rectify historical injustices.
Right.
The fundamental premise, as our sources explain it, is to address the systemic disadvantages faced by minority groups, particularly in the U.S., where they had been historically excluded or marginalized from mainstream institutions for centuries, really.
You're absolutely right to emphasize that foundational intent. These policies were essentially engineered to push back against, literally centuries of discriminatory practices.
Practices that led to huge imbalances.
Staggering imbalances in who got what opportunities. When we talk about historical injustices, we're really referring to this pervasive legacy of legal and societal structures.
Like Jim Crow.
Exactly, like Jim Crow laws, restrictive housing covenants, various forms of institutionalized discrimination, things that actively prevented entire groups of people from accessing quality education, gaining meaningful employment, building economic advancement.
It wasn't just social prejudice, it was baked into the system.
It was systemic. Think about the lasting effects of segregation, where separate was inherently unequal, or discriminatory lending practices that created generational wealth gaps that persist today.
Right.
So affirmative action stepped in as an attempt to proactively rebalance opportunities, to enhance the presence of these traditionally marginalized groups within institutions, universities, workplaces, government agencies that had for so long operated with these inherent systemic disadvantages against them.
So the idea was to proactively open doors.
Exactly. Open doors that had been historically shut and, frankly, remained stubbornly closed even after some legal changes.
Okay. On the face of it, That foundational intent leveling that playing field after centuries of systemic bias, it seems inherently just, doesn't it?
It certainly sounds like a just goal.
But what's truly fascinating, and maybe a bit frustrating in our sources, is how that clear intent then spirals into something incredibly complex and, as you said, deeply controversial.
Hmm.
What's the fundamental tension that makes it so fraught?
Well, that tension, as our sources really highlight, stems directly from the method used to achieve this rebalancing.
The how.
Exactly. While the purpose is about correcting past wrongs, the core contention for critics is that affirmative action is argued to constitute racial discrimination because it necessitates the explicit consideration of race in various decision-making processes.
Okay, so it's the use of race itself.
That's the sticking point. This isn't just a minor detail for critics, it's the central point of contention for those who oppose these policies.
So for critics, this isn't just some fine point of law, it's the fundamental issue. How does that core contention then tie into their larger vision of what a truly equitable society should look like?
Precisely. For critics, the heart of the issue is that any explicit consideration of race, even if it's intended to be corrective, fundamentally clashes with what they see as the ideal of a colorblind society.
Colorblind. That term itself is loaded, isn't it?
It is. It sparks debate. For some, it means ignoring race entirely. For critics of affirmative action, though, it generally means treating all individuals equally without any consideration of their racial background, especially when it comes to things like university admissions or jobs.
The ideal being that race should just be irrelevant in those contexts.
Exactly. Reducing individuals to their qualifications alone. They argue that the moment you introduce race as a factor, whether in admissions or hiring, you're moving away from an individual merit-based system.
So it shifts the focus.
It shifts the focus from an individual's unique qualifications and abilities to their racial identity. And this, for critics, means that race, which ideally should be an irrelevant factor, becomes a defining one in specific situations.
You know, here's an insight from the sources that really makes you pause. They suggest that this emphasis on racial identity, even with the best intentions for correction, might paradoxically end up reinforcing the very racial categories we're maybe trying to move beyond.
That's a profound concern raised by critics, yes.
It forces us to ask, are we inadvertently seeing each other more as members of distinct racial groups rather than just as individuals? That, to me, is a truly profound and perhaps unsettling question central to this critique.
It cuts deep into how we categorize ourselves and others.
So what does this look like when it plays out in tangible, real-world situations? Like, say, applying to a university.
Well, the sources offer a very direct example to illustrate this core contention. It really paints a vivid picture of how this plays out.
Okay.
They state that it is not uncommon for a university to prioritize minority applicants over others with comparable qualifications based solely on their racial background.
Okay, so not just a factor, but potentially the deciding factor between comparable candidates.
That's the scenario described, yes. And this isn't just hypothetical. It describes a real-world dynamic that generates significant debate and concern, and it forms the basis of many legal challenges we've seen.
You know, when we talk about theory, it's one thing, but our sources really bring this home with a very relatable scenario.
Mm-hmm.
Let's imagine, just for a moment, two university applicants. They're vying for a spot in a highly competitive program.
Okay.
One candidate, let's call her Sarah, she's diligently met all the necessary academic and extracurricular benchmarks. Top-tier grades, strong test scores, compelling essays, solid activities showing leadership, passion, the whole package.
Right, checks all the boxes.
Then there's Mark. He's from a historically marginalized group. He also meets the basic requirements, but perhaps his overall profile, if you evaluate it solely on those academic metrics and extracurriculars, might be objectively weaker than Sarah's.
Okay, so a difference in the quantifiable metrics.
Yeah. And the source describes a situation where Sarah may be overlooked in favor of Mark, despite his presenting a, let's say, weaker overall profile on paper, simply because Mark is from a historically marginalized group and Sarah is not.
And this is precisely where critics argue that affirmative action crosses a line.
From corrective measure to...
The discriminatory one, in their view. They construe this practice as a direct violation of the principle of equal treatment under the law. They argue it fundamentally undermines the commitment to meritocracy in educational environments.
Meritocracy meaning.
Meaning, for them, that opportunities should ideally be distributed based purely on an individual's demonstrated abilities, qualifications, and potential, rather than their racial identity.
Right.
Such an approach, from their perspective, raises these profound ethical questions about the legitimacy of creating advantages or disadvantages based on race, even when the underlying intention is to address historical inequities.
It forces you to really consider what equality truly means, doesn't it? If different standards are applied based on group affiliation.
Exactly, and whether that approach in the long run truly benefits anyone or achieves the goal of a fair society.
That direct comparison certainly puts the ethical questions front and center. But if the goal, as we discussed, is truly to rectify these profound historical wrongs, is it even possible to achieve that without, in some measure, applying different standards to different groups, at least temporarily?
That's the multi-billion-dollar question, isn't it?
Yeah. Where do critics draw that line between affirmative action and discrimination in practice? This scenario seems to embody a broader philosophical argument against affirmative action.
It really does.
It brings us directly to the heart of the critique. The idea that affirmative action itself is a form of discrimination, specifically because it challenges the ideal of meritocracy and equal treatment.
That's the crux of it, precisely. The sources make it very clear that critics argue that by permitting race to influence decisions about education, about jobs, affirmative action is antithetical to the principles of fairness that are foundational to civil rights legislation.
Antithetical. Strong word.
Yeah. Very strong. This perspective is rooted deeply in the belief that a truly equitable society should judge individuals on the basis of their abilities and qualifications rather than their racial identity.
So it's a clash.
It's a direct clash between what critics perceive as a group equity approach, focusing on balancing outcomes for different groups, and an individual merit approach, where each person's qualifications are considered independently, regardless of background or group affiliation.
And from their viewpoint.
From this viewpoint, the moment you allow race to be a factor, even with noble intentions, you're compromising that fundamental principle of individual fairness.
So it's about the vision of a society where opportunities are solely based on your own capabilities, irrespective of your background, racial or otherwise.
That's the ideal they champion.
That's a powerful ideal. And it's easy to see why critics feel that affirmative action, in practice, moves away from that. But beyond individual fairness, critics also raise these really profound concerns about the policy's impact on society as a whole.
Yes, specifically the challenge it poses to societal cohesion.
Bringing people together versus potentially pushing them apart.
This is a critical point that the sources emphasize repeatedly. They highlight that the emphasis on racial categorization, which is inherent in affirmative action policies, can result in the unintended consequence of exacerbating societal divides.
Unintended, but still a consequence.
Right. The argument here is that as individuals are labeled and categorized primarily by their racial backgrounds for the purpose of these policies, the opportunity for a cohesive and united society may diminish.
So it fragments things.
It can, they argue, lead to a fragmented social landscape where individuals primarily identify with their racial groups rather than with shared human values or some kind of collective national identity.
Interesting.
This perspective posits that such policies, rather than fostering unity and healing historical wounds, actually perpetuate a cycle of grievance and resentment.
Grievance and resentment. How so?
By constantly drawing attention to racial differences and potentially creating perceptions of unfairness, which thereby undermines social cohesion.
That's a strong and concerning claim, that policies intended to unite might actually divide. It makes you wonder, doesn't it?
It does.
If we're constantly being channeled into these distinct racial groups, does it make finding common ground, even on issues that affect us all, like, I don't know, climate change or economic stability, that much harder?
It arguably could, yes.
It's almost like everyone's speaking a different dialect, even when using the same language. How might such categorization affect interpersonal relationships? Collective action?
Well, it certainly seems to suggest that a focus on group identity can sometimes overshadow commonalities and shared goals, potentially creating deeper rifts.
Yeah. And this sense of division is particularly acute for certain groups who feel directly impacted by these policies, leading to what our sources refer to as the concept of reverse discrimination.
Right. This is a perspective that highlights how individuals from majority racial groups may feel marginalized or overlooked due to affirmative action policies, creating a real sense of unfairness for them.
And the sources provide a very clear, almost archetypal example of this perception, don't they?
They do.
Imagine an individual from a non-minority background facing rejection from a university or a job despite possessing qualifications that align with the institution or company's requirements.
A common scenario cited in these debates.
The feeling that can emerge for that person is that they may perceive the system as fundamentally unjust because they believe a minority applicant with perhaps lesser qualifications was prioritized over them simply due to race.
It feels like the rules were changed on them.
Exactly. This isn't just a theoretical objection. It's a very personal, often emotional experience of perceived injustice for some people.
Exactly. And the sources elaborate that such personal experiences can contribute significantly to feelings of resentment and division.
Which makes things worse overall.
It arguably complicates efforts to foster a more harmonious multicultural society. It's seen by critics as a new form of discrimination arising from measures meant to correct past ones.
Creating what they view as an uneven playing field.
Right. For those who don't belong to a group benefiting from the policy, this raises a crucial question about how these very personal, often painful experiences shape broader public opinion and political discourse around affirmative action.
Do these individual perceptions of injustice fuel a larger narrative of unfairness?
It seems likely. And how does that impact the way the policy is viewed and debated in the public sphere? It often leads to increased polarization.
Yeah, you can definitely see that. Those profound societal and ethical questions inevitably lead us directly into the legal realm, where these conflicts often get played out, right, in courtrooms.
Absolutely. That's where the rubber meets the road, legally speaking.
And at the absolute center of this legal debate is a landmark piece of legislation, the Civil Rights Act of 1964.
Foundational, yes.
It feels like the very foundation upon which many of these arguments are built.
That's absolutely right. Our sources highlight that the interaction between affirmative action and the Civil Rights Act of 1964 adds an additional layer of complexity to this already intricate argument.
Another layer.
Indeed. Specifically, Title VII of the Civil Rights Act explicitly prohibits employment discrimination based on race, color, religion, sex, or national origin.
Which was huge at the time.
Monumental. This was and remains a monumental piece of legislation in the United States designed with the express purpose of eliminating overt discrimination in employment practices. It was meant to be a cornerstone of equality.
Making sure someone's race couldn't be used as a barrier to opportunity.
That was the core principle.
Okay, so if I'm understanding correctly, the Civil Rights Act was essentially meant to make sure that race couldn't be a factor in employment decisions. Full stop.
That's the plain reading many would argue for, yes.
But then you have affirmative action policies, which by their very design do explicitly consider race, albeit with a different intent, that corrective intent we talked about.
Right, there's a tension.
So for critics, this clear prohibition against discrimination based on race in Title VII forms the very basis of their argument against affirmative action policies that explicitly consider race.
It's their primary legal anchor.
It sets up this perceived fundamental contradiction right at the heart of the law itself. How do they reconcile that? Or do they see it as irreconcilable?
Well, from the critic's standpoint, it's largely seen as irreconcilable. They contend that these policies not only contravene the equitable spirit of this legislation, but also perpetuate a cycle of discrimination where one's racial identity becomes a defining factor in determining opportunities.
So going against the spirit of the law.
That's their argument. This standpoint is emblematic of a broader concern that measures aimed at rectifying historical injustices should not result in new forms of discrimination, particularly against individuals who do not belong to minority groups.
Okay.
It highlights a core legal argument that discrimination under the law means any consideration of race that disadvantages an individual regardless of the stated intent or which group is being favored.
Regardless of intent. That's key.
For them, yes. So if the Civil Rights Act says no discrimination based on race, then policies that use race, even for what proponents see as a positive social goal, are fundamentally at odds with that principle.
That makes the perceived conflict incredibly clear. It creates this tension between achieving a desired social outcome, like greater diversity, or redressing historical wrongs.
And upholding a strict legal principle of non-discrimination for all individuals.
Yeah. You can see how this legal interpretation directly influences the ongoing legislative battles, the judicial debates surrounding equality and equity. It's this constant push and pull.
In the courts and in public discourse, absolutely.
And this specific legal contradiction, This perceived tension between the aim of equality and the method of affirmative action was put to a very significant test in a seminal Supreme Court case that still impacts policy and legal arguments today.
Indeed. The landmark Supreme Court case, Regents of the University of California v. Beck from 1978.
Right.
It vividly illustrated this legal contradiction, becoming a critical touchstone in the decades-long debate over affirmative action. This case truly brought the conflict into sharp focus.
And the specifics of the Bake case really help us understand the legal tightrope the courts have tried to walk ever since.
Yeah.
Alan Bake, a white applicant, denied admission to the University of California Davis Medical School.
Right.
What made his case so compelling, and ultimately led it all the way to the Supreme Court, was that he presented qualifications that were objectively superior. The sources say he had higher GPAs and test scores than some minority applicants who were granted admission under the institution's affirmative action policies.
And those policies set aside a specific number of seats.
Exactly. Specific quota for minority candidates. So this wasn't just about him being rejected. It was about the specific context of why he felt he was rejected because of that racial quota.
And the Supreme Court's decision in Bake was, as you said, incredibly nuanced. It left a lasting and very complex legal precedent.
What did they actually decide?
Well, the court's ruling underscored the tension inherent in affirmative action practices. It did this by affirming the necessity of considering individual qualifications.
So merit matters.
Yes, while simultaneously recognizing the need to address historical disparities.
Okay, so trying to do both.
Trying to balance both. So while the court found that the university's use of a strict quota system, setting aside that fixed number of seats, was unconstitutional because it effectively discriminated against Bake on the basis of race.
So quotas are out.
Strict quotas, yes. But it also affirmed that race could be one of many factors considered in university admissions.
Ah, okay, so not a complete rejection of affirmative action itself, but definitely setting boundaries.
Precisely. They ruled that while fostering diversity was a legitimate and compelling goal that could be considered.
Diversity is valuable.
Yes, a compelling interest. But it could not do so at the expense of merit-based considerations, meaning strict racial quotas were impermissible.
Okay, so race could be a factor, but not the sole or determining factor.
Exactly. Nor could a specific number of spots be set aside for minority applicants to the exclusion of others based solely on race.
It really sounds like walking a perpetual legal tightrope for institutions trying to achieve diversity.
That's a perfect description.
What kind of challenges does a ruling like that present for universities, for employers trying to craft policies that comply with the law but still pursue diversity goals?
Oh, significant and ongoing challenges, absolutely. Institutions have to meticulously craft their admissions and hiring processes. They need to ensure they're fostering diversity without crossing that line into what the court deemed impermissible racial discrimination.
Which led to things like holistic review.
Exactly. The widespread adoption of holistic review processes, particularly in university admissions. In a holistic review, race can be one of many factors considered, alongside socioeconomic background, unique life experiences, extracurriculars, essays, and of course, academic metrics.
So the whole person.
The idea of the whole person, yes. But race cannot be the deciding factor that automatically bypasses an otherwise qualified applicant.
But even that approach is constantly challenged, right?
Constantly scrutinized and challenged in the courts. It leads to this perpetual legal tightrope and ongoing debates about its practical implementation. We've certainly seen that play out over the decades since Bake.
So institutions are trying to achieve a social goal within these very narrow and maybe constantly shifting legal parameters.
That sums it up well. But while affirmative action is a central focal point of these debates, our sources reveal it's really just one thread.
One piece of a bigger puzzle.
Exactly. One thread in a larger, incredibly complex tapestry of modern social division.
And that larger tapestry truly is vast and, frankly, concerning. It shows how deeply fragmented our society seems to have become. Our source and highlight several key drivers of this widening schism, starting with economic stratification.
A major one.
Identified as a primary driver of social division, with the gap between the highest and lowest earners having consistently grown over the last several decades. That's according to a stark 2020 Pew Research Center report mentioned.
And this widening income disparity isn't just abstract numbers on a spreadsheet, is it?
No, it feels very real.
It manifests in very tangible ways in people's daily lives. It reflects a societal landscape where wealth is increasingly concentrated, leading to vastly stratified access to critical resources.
What kind of resources are we talking about?
We're talking about essential things: quality education, comprehensive health care, stable, safe housing, the basics for a decent life.
And for lower income individuals.
For lower income individuals and families, this creates what the sources call systemic barriers that make it incredibly difficult to transcend their socioeconomic status. Think about the lack of affordable childcare, or the cost of transportation to get to a decent job, or the sheer financial strain of an unexpected medical bill.
Hurdles that just keep people stuck.
They actively perpetuate a cycle of poverty for generations. These economic divides mean vastly different lived experiences, drastically different opportunities, even significant disparities in life expectancies.
Which just deepens the societal rifts, makes it harder for people to even relate to each other's circumstance.
Absolutely.
And this economic divide, unfortunately, is almost inextricably linked to another fundamental area: education.
Yes, deeply connected.
Our sources underscore that access to education serves as another vital aspect of social division, simply because educational attainment is intrinsically linked to social mobility.
It's seen as the pathway up.
Right. It's the pathway to a better life for so many, but that path isn't equally accessible, is it?
Not at all, and this is a truly critical point. Our sources delve into something they term the educational industrial complex.
Okay, what's that? Sounds a bit ominous.
Well, it's a fascinating and rather concerning idea. It suggests that education, much like other sectors, has become increasingly commercialized, driven by market forces, profit motives, rather than purely pedagogical aims.
How does that play out?
Think about standardized testing industries, spiraling university tuition costs, even the funding models for public schools that rely so heavily on local property taxes. The argument is that this commercialization actively further exacerbates inequalities.
So even well-intentioned programs might not be enough.
Right. So while initiatives like free community college are positive steps towards bridging gaps, many students still confront these additional financial burdens: transportation costs, childcare, access to necessary tech like laptops and reliable internet.
Things that could be insurmountable for those already struggling.
Exactly. And maybe more profoundly, our sources emphasize that the disproportionate allocation of resources to affluent districts creates an environment where children from lower-income families receive a subpar education right from day one.
From kindergarten.
Pretty much. This immediately limits their future opportunities and significantly exacerbates societal divides right from the schoolyard.
So you can easily paint a picture of two very different educational paths based almost solely on zip code.
Or even which generation you belong to sometimes.
And the long-term implications for social mobility are just stark. One path leading to opportunity and advancement, the other maybe to persistent struggle, trapping people in cycles of disadvantage.
It's a fundamental challenge to the idea of equal opportunity.
Because if the starting line isn't level, how can the race ever be truly fair?
That's the question it poses.
And these educational and economic divides are often amplified by persistent historical factors, things that go beyond even the specific debate over affirmative action itself.
That's absolutely correct. The sources stress that racial and ethnic disparities further complicate the narrative of social division. And they're not merely historical footnotes.
Still relevant today.
Very much so. The sources highlight that historical injustices, prejudices, discriminatory practices, they continue to actively shape the socio-economic landscape today.
How so?
Institutions like the American Psychological Association report that racial minorities often encounter systemic obstacles. These come in the form of biased policies and institutionalized racism that are deeply embedded in various sectors.
So not just individual biases, but baked into the way things work.
Yes, embedded in employment, the criminal justice system, healthcare access, housing. These aren't just remnants of the past. They manifest in very real and tangible ways today.
And we have specific data points that really drive this home, don't we? Showing how these systemic obstacles play out.
Yes, the sources provide some stark examples.
A 2021 report from the Urban Institute, for example, states that Black individuals are at disproportionately higher risk for unemployment compared to their white counterparts, even when controlling for education and skills.
That's a powerful and deeply troubling statistic.
It really is. It suggests that even when someone has done everything right, pursued their education, developed skills, gained experience, there are still systemic barriers in place.
Barriers that can prevent them from accessing opportunities that others might take for granted.
This pervasive inequality in opportunity, as the sources explain, breeds resentment and suspicion among different racial groups.
And it fosters an ongoing cycle of distrust.
Yeah. And it's crucial to understand that this is happening irrespective of specific affirmative action policies, right?
That's a key point. It demonstrates a deeper, more pervasive problem of racial inequality that continues to divide society.
So even if affirmative action were to vanish tomorrow,
These underlying disparities and the distrust they generate would likely still remain, creating ongoing friction and this persistent, deeply felt sense of injustice within society.
and in today's digital age, there's this powerful, maybe insidious force that seems to be accelerating all these divisions, magnifying the impact of economic, educational, racial disparities.
You're talking about social media.
Exactly. Social media is designed to connect us, but our sources suggest it's often doing the opposite.
Yes, the sources point out that social media platforms serve as an amplifier of social division by creating echo chambers that reinforce existing biases and misconceptions.
Echo chambers, we hear that term a lot.
And for good reason. It's driven by a fundamental human tendency. Really, we tend to seek out information that aligns with our pre-existing beliefs.
And the algorithms help.
The algorithms are designed to feed us more of what we already consume, what keeps us engaged. A study from the Oxford Internet Institute found that almost 60% of social media users interact primarily with like-minded individuals. 60%. Wow.
Which means they have limited exposure to diverse perspectives. This creates a profound form of polarization, where productive dialogue essentially just grinds to a halt.
It's tough to have a genuine conversation when everyone's insulated in their own bubble.
Constantly having their beliefs affirmed, yeah.
Yeah.
And that can, in turn, really escalate to extreme forms of social division.
Yeah.
We're seeing it play out right now in so many ways across our society.
From political discourse to fundamental disagreements about basic facts themselves.
Absolutely.
It's like retreating into insulated communities devoid of diverse viewpoints, as the sources put it.
A good description.
When you're only hearing voices that echo your own thoughts, it's incredibly difficult to understand, let alone empathize with, opposing viewpoints.
The other side seems alien.
Or even hostile, yeah. This inevitably deepens societal divides and erodes the potential for common understanding, making it exponentially harder to bridge any of the other gaps we've discussed: economic, educational, racial.
It pours fuel on the fire, essentially.
Yeah.
So when you put all these factors together, the economic inequality, the educational disparities, the persistent racial barriers, and this amplifying, polarizing effect of social media, what's the ultimate overarching impact on our society?
Well, the sources suggest that the nexus of all these compounding factors perpetuates both a cultural and a psychological distance between disparate groups.
Not just physical distance, but mental and emotional distance.
Exactly. It's not just about people living in different neighborhoods. It's about a growing inability to truly understand, relate to, or even trust those outside of one's immediate social or ideological circle.
And that leads to?
This ultimately leads to a profound erosion of trust in institutions and democratic values.
Erosion of trust. That
Yes,
sounds bad.
it is. Trust, as the sources powerfully emphasize, is foundational for social cohesion. It's the glue that holds a society together. It allows for collective action, shared governance.
But if that glue dissolves,
As communities become more divided, mutual understanding erodes, making collaborative effort to solve pressing issues challenging, if not impossible. When trust breaks down like this, it becomes incredibly difficult for societies to even agree on common goals.
or even acknowledge shared problems.
Right, like climate change, public health crises, economic stability, let alone work together to solve them. It's a fundamental threat to our collective future.
That really hits home. If we can't even agree on what the problems are, or trust the very systems and institutions meant to address them, then the ideal of collective progress seems increasingly distant, almost utopian.
It feels that way sometimes.
It sounds like a deeply concerning spiral, where the problems just reinforce each other, creating an ever-widening chasm.
That's exactly it. And as these divisions become entrenched, public policies become increasingly polarized,
Making things worse, not better.
often deepening the existing fault lines rather than addressing them. Instead of finding common ground and pragmatic solutions, political debates often become these zero-sum games, reinforcing rather than resolving the divisions.
And circling back to our central topic,
Circling back, critics firmly maintain that affirmative action, rather than advancing collective progress and healing societal rifts, actually perpetuates a cycle of grievance and resentment precisely because it focuses on race.
so for them, It's part of the problem, not the solution.
That's their argument. They argue that true progress can only be achieved when individuals, regardless of their racial background, are treated with equal consideration and assessed based on their abilities, character, and potential contributions to society.
Back to that individual merit ideal.
For them, a system that focuses on individual merit rather than group identity is the only sustainable path to a truly unified and prosperous society.
This raises a crucial, sort of lingering question that hangs over all of it, doesn't it?
It certainly does.
How can a society that is increasingly fragmented by these various interconnected factors possibly find a path forward towards genuine unity and shared prosperity?
The million-dollar question again.
Yeah, the challenge is immense. How do we reconcile the profound desire to address historical wrongs and systemic disadvantages with the equally strong aspiration for a truly colorblind meritocracy, especially when both aims are fraught with complex challenges and generate such fierce, seemingly intractable debate?
There are no easy answers there.
No.
Yeah.
So what does this all mean for us, the listeners, as we try to make sense of this incredibly complex world around us? We've embarked on this deep exploration of the profound tensions inherent in affirmative action policies. The good, noble intentions of rectifying historical injustices versus the equally profound critiques that they, in practice, might constitute a new form of racial discrimination.
The core conflict.
We've navigated the complex legal tightrope of the Civil Rights Act and that landmark Big ruling, which tried to balance competing ideals, creating a precedent that's been debated and challenged for decades.
A very delicate balance.
And we've also clearly seen how these specific debates fit into a much larger, deeply concerning landscape of social division. A landscape driven by economic inequality, educational disparities, persistent racial and ethnic barriers.
And amplified by the echo chambers of our digital world.
Right. All of it interconnected.
What's truly fascinating here, and what we really hope you take away from this, is that a comprehensive understanding truly requires grappling with all these interconnected elements.
You can't look at it in isolation.
Exactly. It's not just about one policy, it's about the complex social dynamics that define our communities, the intricate legal frameworks that govern our society, and the deeply held beliefs about fairness, equity, and opportunity that drive so much of our public discourse.
Beliefs that often clash.
Very often. Our goal throughout this deep dive was really to impartially convey the arguments and evidence presented in the sources, to equip you with robust knowledge and a nuanced perspective, rather than trying to prescribe solutions or take a side.
Not telling you what to think, but how to think about it more deeply.
Precisely. It's about giving you the tools to understand the full scope of the challenge.
And that comprehensive understanding, we believe, sets the stage for your own continued exploration and critical thinking.
Hopefully.
This perspective really highlights the persistent legal contradictions posed by affirmative action in the context of the Civil Rights Act, as well as the broader implications for social integration and collective progress.
It connects the dots.
So the ultimate question for you to mull over as you step away from this deep dive is perhaps the most profound of all. What is the pathway to a truly inclusive and unified society? One that effectively addresses past injustices without inadvertently creating new forms of division.
And how do we even begin to foster trust and find common ground?
Yeah, how do we foster that trust when the very methods of achieving equity are so fiercely and fundamentally debated?
A question for all of us.
We'll leave you with that thought.